Hello, grade 8s. This short lesson will teach you how to calculate the cost of sales and a markup. It's important to understand how a business works and how prices are determined. And for our example, we're going to use something easy like tomatoes. So imagine that there is a tomato farm, and a farmer grows their tomatoes in the farm and prepares them for market. Most of us don't buy the tomatoes at the farm. We buy the tomatoes in a supermarket. So the tomato needs to make a journey, and its first step in the journey is going to be to a place called The wholesaler is going to buy lots and lots and lots of tomatoes. Their business comes in ordering big quantities. And they are going to pay the farmer for these tomatoes, and then what they're going to do is they're going to charge just a little bit more because they need to cover their own costs. The cost might be the cost of the packaging for the tomatoes, as well as the people and labor, the lights, the electricity, all the things that allow the wholesaler to open. A good example of a wholesaler in South Africa is markup. From the wholesaler, the tomatoes are then going to travel to the supermarket or the spaza or the street where they're going to be sold. And the vendor is going to go to the wholesaler and buy tomatoes from the wholesaler, then put them onto things like plates if you're buying them in town or at the taxi rank, and sell them on to you. Each time the tomatoes change hands, they're going to become more expensive. And the reason they become more expensive is that each business along the way needs to cover the cost of paying for the tomatoes, as well as their own costs of selling those tomatoes in the shop. Each time the price increases, we call this markup. And markup exists so that a business can actually make a profit and cover the cost of the goods that it is selling. In business and accounting terminology, we call the cost of the goods the cost of sales, the cost, in a sense, of doing business and getting the merchandise to you. And what every business is going to do, in English we say is going to mark up or increase the price to allow it to cover their costs and make a bit of profit, a bit of money for the business. Markup is usually determined in percentages, and we're going to have to revise a few things from mathematics in order to do these calculations well. And we have to remember from primary school that 50% is also, when it's converted to a decimal number, 0.50. Or for another example, 75% would be equal to 0.75. And for the purposes of our calculations, in case you didn't cover it in primary school, we also will sometimes deal with numbers over 100%, for example, 115%. And we need to be able to write that as a decimal like 1.15. The way that we are usually presented with cost of sales problems is we are given the sales price and we are given the markup. And the way that we're going to calculate the cost of sales is we're going to take the sales price that's given to us, divide by 100% plus the markup, and we are going to get the cost of sales. Let's try a problem now as an example. Say, for example, that we had sales of 150,000 rands. Perhaps it's clothing that we've sold. And the clothing is marked up by 40%. To calculate the cost of sales, we're going to start with the sales price. And then the slightly harder part, we're going to take the markup and add it to the original price, which we're going to call 100%. And we're going to get 140%, which is the new amount that the things cost. It is very important, though, that we use a decimal when we do our calculation. We don't use 140. We convert that into a decimal of 1.40. So to get our cost of sale, we're going to take now the selling price and divide it by the 100% plus markup, convert it to a decimal, and we're going to get a final answer of 107,142 Rand and 86 cents. You always need to round off, and many of you might have gotten 85 here when you tried this calculation, but we always round off to the nearest cent. And this is the cost of sales. So working backwards, this story makes a lot of sense. The business would have purchased the goods, the clothing, for 107,142 Rand and 86 cents, and then marked it up or increased the price by 40%, and then sold it, not for 107,000 Rand, but for 150,000 Rand in order to make some profit. This will take some time to work through, but as long as you can learn how to get the 100% plus the markup converted to a decimal, you should be good to go. Good luck!